Welcome back to the Stimulating Stuff podcast. I'm your host, the pulchritudinous Rich Vogel, walled up and broadcasting from the catacombs like Fortunato from the cask of Amontillado. Who loves obscure references? I know this guy does. Okay, the cask of Amontillado was one of my favorite Edgar Allan Poe stories, and I'll just leave it at that. No, I won't. I'm a fan of Edgar Allan Poe, or at least I was in high school, and I have to say what I love about that story is that it's told from the murderer's perspective. Not sure if many of you enjoy a good scary story, but I know I do, and it reminds me that there's this new movie coming out May 31st called In a Violent Nature. It's definitely a slasher flick, but it's shot from the perspective of the killer, and it has a score of 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. In a Violent Nature. Check out the trailer on YouTube and tell me if you don't want to see this thing in IMAX. Anyway, I took some time off from podcasting, but some of you just weren't cool with that. No, you had to bombard me with email and text messages, phone calls, urging me to continue. There's a million dead podcasts out there. Why'd you have to pick mine to resurrect? I probably shouldn't be so sarcastic. Seriously, I want to thank all the listeners who sent me and continue to send me truly inspiring and beautiful messages about how much they love this podcast and encouraging me to continue. You know, I was just going to shut this whole podcast thing down, for reasons personal, I guess. But it was you who inspired me to keep this flame burning. I hope you know that I sincerely appreciate you and the feedback. So what's happening in our tiny little world of neuromonitoring right now? I guess the big news is that Empower recently announced the acquisition of Assure. It's a bit more complicated than that, but it's basically an acquisition. And, good on them. Looks like a good partnership. In other news, the AS&M annual meeting is right around the corner. The meeting will be held in Washington, D.C., May 17th or 19th. It's exciting for me for two reasons. One, I'll be starting my term as president, and two, I was program chair along with Brian Willent, so we were co-chairs, and I think we designed a really great program. We went out of our way to bring you new speakers and fresh topics, and we also have a whole track set aside for people who are newer to the field who need basic education and training. I think this conference is going to have record attendance. Our room block is already sold out, and we've added additional rooms. So definitely secure your hotel room as soon as possible. We also have so many exhibitors attending that we recently had to redesign the exhibit hall to accommodate everyone. Hey, if you can break away from whatever it is that you're doing, I'd love to see you in DC. Most of you anyway. Just kidding. One more thing about AS&M. If you're a voting member, be sure to vote to approve the bylaws. We really need everyone's participation in this thing. If you haven't voted yet, check your spam folders for an email from eballot.com. It was sent March 15th, and there's been reminders for voting members who haven't voted. I think one each week. Anyway, please vote. Polls are closing in mid-April. So, what else is happening in the neuromonitoring news? Oh, I know. I'm unemployed. It's crazy. You know, I went to this to my GP the other day. It's just my family doctor, and the person at the front desk asked me my employment status, and I was like, unemployed. How embarrassing is that? Well, for me anyway. Dang, I've had a job basically since I was 14. Anyway, so I currently have time on my hands to write and produce this show, at least until I find my next and hopefully last career placement. All right, whoa. Everybody slow down. Before you start inundating me with messages asking me what happened and how I became employed and all of that, let's not focus on the past. There's really nothing to see there. I'm a forward-looking guy, so let's talk about the future. I think the more interesting questions are, what are you going to do next? And what do you want to do? The answer to what are you going to do next is, I don't know. I'm actively looking for a job, hopefully joining forces with an organization where I can leverage my knowledge and skills, spread my wings, grow professionally, support and empower a team, and just grind hard toward a shared vision. In the meantime, I'm looking for that opportunity to otherwise fill my spare time with podcasting, professional development, personal growth. I think a far more interesting and exciting question is, what do you want to do? Aside from finding that forever family and an amazing organization just like I described, well, I had to start by looking at this whole thing optimistically. From this perspective, unemployment is a feature, not a bug. What do I mean by that? Look, you can focus on the negatives of unemployment, right? Like having to say it out loud to a receptionist at your doctor's office, like the bank account draining faster than sand through an hourglass, the very real prospect of having to pick up and move nationally or internationally, and the constant feeling like you need to be busy finding employment, and the list goes on. Or you can think of unemployment as a feature. It's an opportunity to do some reflection, some soul searching, some professional development, to work on little projects that bring you enjoyment, to focus on relationships, and to spend time looking at your life and identifying the intersection between what you love to do and what you're good at. So that's some of what I've been doing, looking at it as a feature. When it comes to part about self-reflection and finding that intersection between what you love to do and what you're good at, I've definitely learned a lot in the past few weeks. You know, one of the more regrettable or inauspicious repercussions of my 15-year career in neuromonitoring is that people tend to think of me solely as a sort of neuromonitoring guru, someone who would be good to lead their company's education program or their quality assurance program. And as a result, people may be quick to say, man, it would be great to work with Rich, but we already have someone leading our education program. It's almost as if the scope of my utility is unidimensional, because folks go straight to neuromonitoring education when they think of me. And I don't blame people for thinking those things about me. In fact, I think a large part of my public persona is connected to sharing that expertise in the form of clinical education. Even though I posted episodes about the business of neuromonitoring and I published articles about the economics of our business, most of the hundreds of invited lectures that I've given all around the world have been educational and clinically focused. So people's perspectives of me and my competencies being rather unidimensional is totally understandable, and really my own doing, I suppose. When I think about it in more depth, I find myself somewhat conflicted. You know, I don't mind being thought of as an expert in neuromonitoring or a guru or whatever. To a certain extent, I suppose I am. Own it, right? Even though it's been a while since I've stepped foot in an operating room, I've stayed closely connected to thousands of cases over the years. I've certainly know best practices and standards of care, and neurophysiology will probably always be just second nature to me. So I embrace those perspectives. On the other hand, while I love to teach because it empowers people and it improves patient care, I have little desire to pursue a career in teaching neuromonitoring, and certainly no desire to work in quality assurance. That's not where I focus my attention when it comes to professional development and career advancement. It's not where I see my value, utility, or contribution when it comes to working in this field. And that's probably a good thing, because there's no jobs left in that space. Many companies are struggling right now, and they just can't afford the caliber of people they need to lead those kinds of efforts like education and quality. Also, while I was happy working in the operating room, albeit not fully professionally fulfilled, I did that work in a clinical climate very different from today's. And beyond that, salaries have also changed dramatically. So I'm just not personally interested in that, but I deeply appreciate and value and respect the people who work in those important roles. I know all of this may come as a surprise to some of you, and particularly those who only know me from conferences, and so you may wonder how I see myself. If I don't want to teach or do clinical work, if I'm not defined by neuromonitoring, then what? What else am I good at? What else can I do? You know, I've vacillated about doing this, but I thought I might tell a story about how I got here. So, as far back as I can remember, I loved writing. When I was in high school, I filled my bedroom walls with poetry and short stories. Sorry about the painting that needed to be done to my parents. And I also won a writing competition to give my high school commencement address. I started college as an English major, wishing to pursue a career in writing, but I hated going to class. I was bored out of my mind. I much preferred playing hacky sack outside the cafeteria and looking at girls. I mean, what do you want? I was like 19 years old. Obviously, my grades suffered, and my parents threatened to pull me out of school. They made me go to a school clinical psychologist because I presented with classic symptoms of ADHD. The psychologist met with me over the course of several days and put me through an extensive test battery. Aside from my parents, I don't think I told anyone about this back then. When the sessions were done, I went in for a final meeting, and the psychologist gave me a 5-page report, which I've kept all these years. The report was dated February 6, 1996, so 28 years ago. So, I'm sitting here alone, Fortunato in the catacombs. Sorry, I'm recording this podcast at home, and I honestly have no idea if anyone is listening because I haven't produced an episode in over 3 months, but what the hell? I'm going to get a little bit vulnerable with the airwaves and share some of what the psychologist wrote in the summary of recommendations section of this report. I know this is odd. I probably shouldn't be sharing this with you because it's very personal and a little embarrassing. It's embarrassing not because there's anything negative in there, quite the opposite actually, but I'm not going to share the whole report anyway. And it's mine to decide what I do with, so I'll share pieces of it with you. By the way, the only other person who's ever seen this is my mother, but I think it's so relevant to this whole discussion about what am I good at and what else can I do. So I'll share it with you. Here it is, portions of the summary and recommendations section. Your mental abilities fall within the very superior/highly gifted range. From the collective results of your comprehensive testing, I estimate your full-scale IQ score is in the range of blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to share that with you. Just kidding. Okay, let me jump down to the meat here. This is where it kind of talks about competencies and stuff. You reported to me that you are bored by your academic experience, frequently missing class and not completing assignments. Your grades have suffered as a result. I would encourage you to identify a major that challenges your intellect because this will likely inspire you to engage academically. During the course of our sessions, I found you to have remarkable aptitude in both verbal and written communication. You are a thoughtful listener, a persuasive speaker, adept at reading social cues, and you adapt well to your surroundings. You have a large group of friends in various social circles, which means that you are well-liked and you seem to fit in everywhere effortlessly. You demonstrate emotional maturity, exceptional cognitive abilities, a strong aptitude for learning, and you're unassuming given your intellectual exceptionalism. Wow. And by the way, the emotional maturity thing, I crack up at that when I think about me being 19 or 20, whatever it was. Anyway, continuing, it says, I get the sense you are embarrassed by your capabilities, perhaps trying to downplay or mask them. I think you would be well advised to embrace them. The report you provided me from the Career Services Center indicates that you are equally well suited, greater than 99% match for careers in science, medicine, law, economics, finance, management, sales, communications, and writing. Your career options are limitless, and I believe you will excel in any profession you choose. Oh my God, gross. I feel like I need to take a shower after reading that. I guess there's a part of me 28 years later that's still a bit embarrassed by those things. But then again, here I am reading this report to the world, or at least my dog, who may be the only person listening right now. Shout out to Polly. Anyway, the report goes on to recommend that I pursue consultation with a career consultant to nail down my ideal trajectory. Of course, I didn't follow that advice. I didn't follow any advice back then. But the point is, here's a licensed clinical psychologist who put me through a multi-day battery of neuropsych and IQ tests at the dawn of my adult life and professional career, telling me that I can literally pursue any career I want because I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. Just kidding. That's a quote from Al Franken's Saturday Night Live character Stuart Smalley from the early 90s, for anybody else who's old like me. But seriously, the psychologist was telling me the world is mine oyster. which I with sword shall open. Shakespeare. Okay, enough of that. In discussing this report with my mother, she recommended that I consider a career path similar to hers, study psychology, then pursue a career in neuroscience. So that's what I did. I became fascinated with the brain. I went to graduate school, as many of you probably know, earning PhDs in neuroscience and psychology, and that's when I found neuromonitoring. I fell in love with that too. Neurophysiology was shockingly easy for me, just looking at the data, interpreting it, understanding what it meant in the context of the patient's surgery and background. And I loved working with patients. I used to tell people that I was one of the few people that I knew who really loved their work. But I wanted more. Despite all of my education and training, I wanted to lead people and learn the business. So I made my way out of the OR and into the office. The problem for me back then is the same as it is for some today, I think. Organizations already have leadership. There tends not to be a pipeline or a pathway into upper leadership. And I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with that. It's just the nature of organizational infrastructure and governance. When neuromonitoring companies get large enough to build infrastructure, they tend to add positions in education and quality last. It's a good role because you're in all the high-level meetings. You learn how to run a business. People listen to your perspectives, input, advice. But there's rarely an opportunity to step into one of those C-suite roles. So people like me tend to get pigeonholed into those roles. Those roles that I like to call last in, first out. They're the last positions that a company creates when they're growing. And frankly, that's sort of how I tended to fall into those roles because the timing was right and various companies that were building out their infrastructure were needing those things, right? So they're the last positions that companies create when they're growing, and they're the first to get cut when companies are struggling. And that's been the majority of my career, not necessarily getting cut or anything, but working in those roles. Although I did have what I think is a very highly successful stint as CEO of a neuromonitoring group in Milwaukee, but I left that role to pursue a marriage, which is by far the most rewarding and satisfying part of my life. So good job on that decision, Rich. But professionally, there's just isn't much out there in our field. It's okay though. I've been preparing for this. When I first started in management in our field, and I'm going back almost 10 years now, I started preparing for the future by reading books and articles on leadership, management, operations, economics, finance, etc. Anything I could get my hands on. A few years ago, mostly in prep for taking that CEO role, I formally enrolled in Harvard's Extension School for Distance Learning and earned credits in economics, accounting, and analytics. Along the way in the course of my career in various leadership positions, whether I was out in front or behind the scenes, whether I was the leader or just the guy lucky enough to sit at the table, I found that I naturally was one of those people who saw the big picture in running a business. I soaked up everything I could along the way, ultimately learning to manage change, plan and execute strategy, assess and optimize culture, inspire people, negotiate, persuade, engage, advocate, problem solve, build brands, assess markets, assess contracts, improve processes, and so much more. I'm not saying that I'm an expert in all these things, but I've made a personal commitment to be a lifelong student and pursue continuous growth in these aspects of business in general. So all of this is to say, I've been doing some reflection, a lot of reflection actually, and I realized there's more to me than quote unquote education or quote unquote clinical expertise. And I don't need to stay in neuromonitoring. I can apply this stuff anywhere. So I have to take a look at the intersection of what I really truly love to do and what I'm really good at. And when I look at past work experiences from that 30,000 foot perspective, the concepts at that intersection that come to mind are leading, developing, and empowering people, collaborating, being part of a team, communications, writing, crafting a message or story, being a decision maker and making the right decision, critical thinking, influencing, breaking down complex information for any audience, and public speaking. Man, I gotta tell you, I really love public speaking. You know why? Because there's such an art to it. Because a key to being a great speaker is understanding and empathizing with your audience. And in order to do that, you need to be selfless and a real student of people, of humanity. And I just love that. I also have to look at what people say about me and what they say I'm good at. The people I respect anyway. These are people who, by virtue of the content of their character and their ability to assess others, and they say nice things, that I find them very highly respectful individuals. Respectable. Anyway, it feels kind of gross saying this because I swear I'm a humble person, but people say that I'm really good at the things that I just mentioned. They also describe, and I've heard several people use this term over the years, this magnetism, that people are, for some reason, drawn to me. They love to hear me speak or read what I write, and I'm just relatable, and what I say resonates in ways that just appeal to people. I guess it all goes back to understanding and empathizing with your audience. But, thank you to those people who have said those things. I always appreciate kind words. So anyway, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do for work. I don't know where I'm going to land. I might start a consulting company. I might move into pharmaceuticals. I might stay in the field of neuromonitoring and neurodiagnostics, working on the non-clinical side if there's anything left out there for someone like me. If not, I'm okay with pivoting. I have knowledge and skills to leverage. In the meantime, while I'm looking for that new career, it's entirely possible I may do some consulting work to help pay the bills. I know I just talked about wanting to be, or not wanting to be, the education guy, but I also have that skill and reputation. So that might be part of what I do. It's not necessarily what I want to do, but I'll do it well. Just don't be surprised if you see me out there grinding, doing what I said I didn't want to do, at least for a little while. I have a hungry dog at home, after all, and she loves her fancy treats. So what's the lesson here? The lesson is this. If you find yourself out of work, no matter what the reason, no matter how you got there, don't let it get you down. Don't think of it as a bug. Think of it as a feature. Know that you have value, and there are plenty of opportunities out there. It's good to take a pause, spend some time doing the things you love to do, find enjoyment and enrichment in your life, focus on your relationships, exercise, do a deep dive on your passions and core competencies to identify the right path forward, then pursue it. Whatever you do, don't let yourself get down and depressed. There's always a path forward. You just need to find it. One more thing before I go. So, what's next for this podcast? Well, I want to expand my presence on social media and broaden my content to talk about things that interest me other than neuromonitoring. So I'm going to use this pod platform to share information from other realms, including business psychology, neuroscience, society, and I'll probably throw in some stuff about neuromonitoring. I haven't decided yet, but I might even use this platform for some AS&M presidential addresses. Totally not sure about that. What I will tell you is that my next topic, or a few topics, depending on what the duration of those episodes are going to be on navigating a job search, because it's a complicated maze to navigate, and I want to share what I'm learning. I mean, really interesting, powerful, informative stuff. So I'm also going to share information down the road on leading people, how to think about organizational culture, how to be a good writer and editor, and I may spend a few episodes sharing some of the secrets about public speaking, because not specifically in neuromonitoring, but in general, there's a lot of people out there that do it, but aren't very good at it and don't know it. And anything I can do to empower those people to help them actually ultimately helps the audience. And that's what it's all about, the audience. So beyond that, I'll probably get into topics like persuasion, negotiation, psychology in the workplace, and how basic principles of economics apply to the work that we do. I'm going to have fun with this, and I hope you'll join me. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please continue sharing this podcast on socials and word of mouth. Also, many thanks to everyone who sends me email and texts. I get some weird stuff sometimes, like some really weird stuff. It tends to come from people who think their email address is somehow anonymous. Please don't send me weird stuff. I love reading your comments, but not that stuff, and I won't respond to it. But please continue sending your comments and insights and critiques, pushback, whatever you want to, stimulatingstuffpodcast@gmail.com. I always love hearing from you. I'm Rich Vogel, and that was Stimulating Stuff.